Welcome back to Liberating Yoga, a space to explore yoga as a practice and path of healing, resistance, and deep connection. My name is Harpinder Mann. I'm a yoga educator, a writer, a seeker, continuing this work of tracing yoga's roots, challenging appropriation, and uplifting practices that honor collective liberation while making yoga truly accessible. In season 1, I shared conversations recorded during the research process for my book, Liberating Yoga from Appropriation to Healing. These dialogues really help to lay the foundation for this work. Now, season 2, we expand upon that. These conversations are rooted in where I am now, after the writing, after deep study, and an ongoing practice. We explore what it means to live these questions in real time, to unlearn, to listen more closely, and to stay in relationship with yoga as a living, evolving tradition. This season, I'm also asking each guest to share a teacher, a guru, a mystic, a revolutionary who is really inspiring their path right now, to bring us into deeper relationship with lineage, to inspire us, and turn to people who can guide us in our becoming. Together, we continue the dialogue, exploring how we honor yoga's past while actively shaping its future. How do we stay grounded in spirituality and liberation during times of collective upheaval? In this episode, I sit down with Lama Rod Owens to explore love, rage, grief, and spiritual practice as tools for transforming and surviving oppressive systems. We dive into the power of lineage, of ancestors and teachers, and how emotions can become gateways to deeper connection, clarity, and action. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Liberating Yoga Podcast. I can't even tell you how excited I am to have Lama Rod Owens on the podcast. Lama Owens, how are you doing today?
I'm good. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, your book, Love and Rage, has been, I don't want to say the Bible, but it has been like the Bible to me, where it's something I turn to so often. And the New Saints as well. I feel like the New Saints is required reading for these apocalyptic times that we are living in. So thank you for your work, for your voice. I have been opening up this season with the question of who is a figure or a being or a teacher who is inspiring you right now?
Yeah, there are so many. Every day, I feel really fortunate to have this capacity to reach out, to open, to reflect on, to dream with so many like great change makers, both who have transitioned and as well as those who still are here, embodied and living amongst us. So I'm like narrowing everything down, in my mind. But, I honestly, I just have to start with Harriet Tubman. Quite honestly, she's been so close to me really since the beginning of quarantine and COVID-19. When COVID happened, it really felt like a huge shift, right? And was really interesting because as COVID was happening, Love and Rage was being released. It was published, June of 2020. And at the same time, Harriet Tubman kind of came in and started really inspiring me to write The New Saints. So there's a really interesting convergence. But for me, Harriet represents what it means to embody a real ethic of love and liberation, and what we have to do to bring about real freedom, right? The actions that we take. It's not just about sitting still, and just praying and wishing, for change to happen, that you have to get involved, right? And no matter what's at risk, right? We still make these choices to get involved. From all the ways that she helped enslaved people escape plantations, right? And slavery, to even like joining the Civil War as a formerly enslaved Black woman and becoming really a kind of a general, like rising to the rank of a general and leading male troops into operations, right? I mean, it's unheard of, right? She broke so many barriers, but she was like, I want my people to be free, and this is what I have to do, even if I have to join an army where I am not represented, where I don't see myself. I will do this, right? By any means necessary. And I try to embody that audacity, that courage, right? That deep, profound love, but also the way that she embodied play as well. Yes, it was serious, hard work, but she also played. She also had fun, right? And we know that just from accounts that have been recorded from people who knew her and lived with her, and so forth. But yeah, so that's who's really inspiring me right now. But let me just add a second one really quickly.
Please.
Another person who I talk a lot about is Andre Leon Talley, who was such an incredible icon, fashion icon, scholar, journalist, right? He transitioned, I think, at about 2022, I think. And he really, as another like Black queer man, really inspired me to open to beauty, right? To claim beauty for myself, right? And to really like love life, right? And in his words, as he was someone deeply influenced by French culture, French philosophy, particularly Voltaire, right? The French Enlightenment, where he really, he had this whole thing around, you have to cultivate your garden, right? You have to cultivate a garden and then offer this garden to the people that you love, right? So beauty was something that was to be shared, right? And it was something he used to create community and to practice intimacy with the people that he loved. So those are the two figures there who are deeply inspiring me right now.
Yeah, thank you so much I love in New Saints how you write about Harriet Tubman as Mother Harriet Tubman. And I was also really so taken. And how do I pronounce the second person's name?
Andre Leon Talley.
Okay, Andre Leon Talley. I was so taken by how you wrote about how we need to have this beauty and joy and play in this work, while knowing that by any means necessary to get ourselves free and to get others free. One reason I was just so excited to speak with you is so many of my students, and I felt it myself, have this sense of, and you talk about this apocalypse, it's not that the world is ending, it's that these truths are being unveiled.
Right.
And I know for myself and my students, there's sometimes a sense of like this hopelessness, this sense of like just so much grief and being with the trauma. What do you have to say to people or students who might be looking out at all of this genocides and wars and ICE and feeling like the weight of it and feeling hopelessness? What can we do when we're really feeling the weight of all that is difficult and is really traumatic?
Yeah, and And I tell people all the time that at some point we have to let our hearts break. Right. And what that really means is that we have to feel the disappointment. Right. And we can feel heavy, we can feel overwhelmed, but so much of that experience of feeling overwhelmed is actually resistance. Right. So we're not even touching the heartbreak. We're actually lost in the resistance to the heartbreak. And what has saved me in my practice was allowing my heart to break, right? And just opening to that heartbreak. And at the same time, calling in like resources, calling in the deep inspiration of people like Harriet Tubman and Andre Leon Talley and whomever feels resonant for you, right? But calling in your people to hold you in the heartbreak. Like this moment is asking us to feel it. Like not to like change anything, not to, but to feel the heartbreak. And in feeling the heartbreak, it begins to change, right? Eventually, as we're moving through the heartbreak, we start having a feeling of groundedness or support. I call it touching the earth for the first time. And that what that really means is that we start touching the truth of things, not our resistance to the truth, but the truth. Again, because we're not actually experiencing the truth of things, we're experiencing our resistance to the truth. Right. So you have to cut through the resistance, open to the brokenheartedness, and the brokenheartedness begins to change. And I would say from my experience, that's when hope really begins, right? Because once you move through the heartbreak, you begin to have a deeper intuition, a more of a clarity, right? And at this point in my practice, having gone through these practices, I see so much potential and possibility. This is why I write in the New Saints that this is the new world, right? And it's hard for us to see and experience this new world because we're still being so distracted by the chaos and the violence. But the new world is here, right? And so we have this incredible opportunity to start shaping the world, right, that we want to see now. Right. And which also means that things have to fall apart. Systems have to collapse. Right. There are things that we will not be able to stop and they will just need to happen. Right. And that's hard to hold, but this is a part of liberation work. This is why I think about and practice with Harriet all the time. Like Harriet, was born enslaved, escaped enslavement, right? And confronted this entrenched system of chattel slavery and did not give up. She was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I will end this. Right. And that's the kind of attitude that we have to take on. Like the world is not what I want to see. This is not what I want to choose. So what am I going to do to start bringing about a new world? Right. And again, for young people, it's like, this is why we have to study the lives of great change makers. This is why, as a queer man, I have to study, historical events like Stonewall, right? When folks were just like tired, right? And then they just fought back, but they didn't know that night they would spark a global gay liberation movement, right? That would lead to so much, civil rights, right? They had no idea. They were just pissed off and decided not to take it anymore, right? We never know what our choices will spark in the moment. We just have to do it. Right. So we just hold on. Like we hold on to the real truth that things change. And things will especially change once we start getting active. Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I was really touching into as you were talking about letting our heart break. Because there is, I'm hearing when there is like the hopelessness and the overwhelm, how that comes from not accepting the reality of what's happening. And when we really let ourselves, I think about one of my students a while ago that was like, I feel like if I start crying, I'm never going to stop.
Right.
What are your thoughts to that? I feel like I've heard that a couple times. And I feel like if I really let myself touch into it, like there is almost like no ground that will be underneath me.
Yeah. But that is kind of like a trust fall, right? So I hear that all the time. It's like, I can't do this because I won't stop crying, right? But maybe you need to just cry for a while, right? And let go of wanting to end the crying, but just cry, just release. Let the brokenheartedness actually support you, take care of you, right? Like we're afraid of grief as well, when in fact we will always be grieving something, right? And so we surrender ourselves to the grief and the brokenheartedness, right? And whatever happens, right? In a lot of Western culture, there is such a resistance to the grieving process. Like we want to hide away or cover grief up, right? And it's just not conducive to the kind of world that we need to see. We need to be openly grieving and openly supporting each other, right? That grief is welcomed, right? In relationships, in workspaces, in schools, right? But we just let ourselves cry. Like when I open to the brokenheartedness, like I know that I will be taken care of, right? Because when I allow myself to grieve, I am tending also to my heart, right? I'm letting things flow and open. I'm telling the truth about how I feel, right? And that's the only practice that's going to get us free, is telling the truth and experiencing the truth. Right? But people are afraid of change as well, and this will change you. You will have to let go of the things that do not help us to experience freedom and liberation, including relationships, including people, right? Because, honestly, not everyone's ready to do this work. Not everyone's ready to get free. Not everyone's ready to do this kind of emotional labor, right? And that's disappointing, but that can't stop us, right? So we're going to feel isolated and alone, absolutely. But realistically, we're not the only ones moving through this work, even though it can feel like that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing in the acknowledgement of the grief. There was a piece in the New Saints where you talk about the Black and queer ancestors before you that didn't make it, and the gratitude that you get to be here alive, but also mourning their lives.
Yes.
And I think there's that like holding of both. Like, how do we hold the gratitude that here we are, we get to be here to do this work, and then also the grief. There's so much to have grief about. How does someone begin to form a relationship to their grief for that to be a part of like the experience of being human?
Yeah. Well, we always have to understand grief in relationship to joy, right? That joy is important to cultivate, to balance the grief, right? So as I remember the lives of the Black queer folks who didn't get to experience a quarter, right, of what I get to experience, right? That I am experiencing this because of what they survived and endured, right? So remembering that, then there's an obligation to live as fully as possible, right? And so when I do that, it's like everything that I do is honoring them. Every choice made in freedom and agency is honoring them, right? And there's joy in that. There's so much joy in being able to do this. That joy actually helps me to hold the grief, right? Reflecting on their lives. Yeah, it's not fair, right? But it has to be okay, right? There's a place that we can get to that is a place of being okay with things. Like this happened, right? But we continue moving on, right? There's a deep kind of acceptance. Not agreeing with, not condoning. That's not what I mean by acceptance. Acceptance, again, is just telling the truth. This happened. This is happening, right? And I can respond to what's happening. I can respond to the truth by doing something that helps, that is a benefit. And me living my life is what helps, right? And even more so, like, when we have this kind of attitude, right, we do connect to these beings, right? And so they begin to live vicariously through us, right? So when they see us practicing joy and experiencing lives that they never got a chance to experience, they feel a lot of happiness, right? And that happiness is actually healing them where they are. Right. It helps them to understand that their lives weren't in vain, right? That their lives meant something and it contributed to you having the opportunity, the capacity to be happy and to be free and to be your most authentic self. Right. That doesn't mean that we stop working. We continue to work because we are preparing the way for the descendants coming in the future in the same way our ancestors prepared the way. For us, we do our part by living honestly, openly, joyfully, but also living in relationship to the brokenheartedness and telling the truth about it all. Right. And for me, that means just being human, basically, like to be fully human, to be fully aware, right? And to make choices that help, not choices that harm.
Yeah, I felt goosebumps, like as you were talking about these beings get to live vicariously through us. Like I really felt the sense of like how they are here with us, that we are not alone. Yeah. And that's such a beautiful intention that you spoke about in the new saints, is like calling upon ancestors, these beings as like support, so we don't feel alone having to carry this all by ourselves. Yeah. I think that's so tremendously beautiful. A question that I had as you were speaking is, and I think because of the work that I do, students will come to me and they're like, what is my work? How can I help? And then when they put that question on me, I'm just like, oh my goodness, I'm trying to figure out my own work. How can I assist you also in figuring out? And you spell work as WERK, which I love in the book. How does one determine what their work is in their own liberation and in collective liberation? I think that's a very meaningful question that folks have, but how does one figure it out?
Well, I mean, I think first, it's about figuring out what we need to be doing in order to get clear about who we are. I think that comes before figuring out the work. I need to get clear about what I'm doing and what my ethic is. Right. So people come to me and they're like, what's my work? Right. And I say, well, what's your ethic? Like, what do you in general? Like, what are you hoping to do in general? Like, what are your values? What are your deepest beliefs about community and liberation? Like, get clear about that. Like, for me, my ethic, in life is to get free and to help others get free, to reduce harm for myself and for others. And then generally to become the medicine that people need, right? So that's my ethic. And once I figured my ethic out, which I've had for a very long time, that was just something that was very present with me, even at an early age. Like I always just felt that, right? So feeling that, and moving through my teens, I just felt myself being led in different places, different kind of issue areas where I was just organizing, doing advocacy work, service work, activism, right? Just going to the places where I felt I was needed. And then over those years, like there was a refinement that happened, right? And then in my late 20s, it led me, in my early 20s, I started being led to Buddhism. In my late 20s, I started my training to become a teacher. And so in that transition to training, I was like, oh, this is my work. Mm-hmm. Like, this is what I'm going to specifically do, is to train in this tradition, to become a meditation teacher, to practice, these really profound ancient practices, right? And tantric Buddhism and the practices of Southeast Asia, right? And I understood that my front line was that of the mind, right? Helping people work through the suffering of mind and spirit, right? I have friends that, they're like policy people, like they impact policies and government, structures and so forth, right? Other people, there are people who cook, and the offering of food and food justice, right, is how they're, expressing their work, right? So it's really all so unique and different, right? But you go through a period where you're just exploring and feeling and feeling the passion for certain things, and let the passion take you right to your work. And it will probably be very unique.
Yeah, thank you. I love, in response to the question, what is my work? The question is, well, what are your ethics? Mm-hmm. What is it that you want to see? Yeah. And I think that's such a helpful way to come into that question, where it's like, well, who are you? Yeah. And letting yourself sit with that question and contemplate. That's really important.
Yeah. Well, it's also the dream. Like, my ethic opens me up to my dream. Like, and so I often ask people when they're working with me in this capacity, I ask them to like talk about what a real liberated future looks like. Right. So once people get that vision, like, it helps to guide them as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for bringing in that question, because I was like, wow, I feel like I used to really sit with that question quite often. And then it was like, it's really interesting how then like the answers and the guidance begins to come. Yes. And it doesn't have to be just me intellectually wrangling something together, where it's just like, no, I can sit with the question and inquiry and then really start to listen and let myself be guided.
That's it. Let yourself be guided. I feel like I have floated in and out of so many things, right? So many projects, so many visions and so forth. And all of it was so necessary to get me to this point, to this moment of real clarity, knowing like, oh yeah, this is what I'm doing, right? This is what I'm called to do.
In the New Saints, you talk about how, sometimes our work and our labor is going to be unrecognized and unseen, and letting that be okay. What about for those that feel like maybe the work that I'm doing isn't enough? It's not enough to change all that is around us. What we might say to those folks?
Yeah, I think that so much of this work is about recognizing that I won't save everything, that I am one person who's very limited, right? Of course, I can join with others and we can create collective work together, right? And movement work, which is really beautiful and wonderful and needed, right? But still, no matter how much I work, I won't see the world that I really want to see. And that's okay. Because what's important is that I do my part, right? I think sometimes we get into the habit of comparing ourselves to others. Like, I won't necessarily be able to do what Harriet did, right? Like, that's a level of engagement that is difficult for me, right? That's okay, because she did her work, and her work inspired me to figure out my work, right? And there's a lot of there's a lot of comparisons and similarities, absolutely. But, going back to grief, like, our grief work is important because it helps us to hold the disappointment that not everything is going to work out. Right. I can try really, really, really hard, and there are things that just won't change. Right. Several years ago, I was speaking with an elder who's in her 80s, and one of the elders who really deeply inspired my work, as a young person. And, she really admitted, she was like, I thought we had done all this work in the 60s and the 70s. And it feels like now we're just going right back to where we were, to where I started. Right. And listening to her, I felt that disappointment. Right. But I also felt like, and this is my work, is to keep pushing forward, is to see where our elders left off, and to keep moving forward, picking up their work and moving on, right? And I may get, to the end of my life, and there may be a shift, and I may say, oh my God, I thought I had handled that, right? Years ago. But what happens, right? And it's easy, to feel as if we can get discouraged. But in fact, it's just the recognition of how complex real collective change is, and that we all have to do our part. And then once you finish your part, right, once you are beginning to transition from this life, you say, you know what? I came here, I did what I could, and now I release this, right? I let this go, and I opened up the space for others to follow me and to pick up the work where I left off, right? I think, again, it's so important to emphasize that grief work is a part of collective liberation. It's intertwined, because grief helps me to take care of all the disappointments, right? It helps me to stay realistic and grounded, right? I am only one person with certain capacities, and I do what I can, and that's all we can do, right? So if someone's like, oh, I should do more, then that becomes a conversation. That becomes something that we are praying about and practicing with. What else can I do? Right? And you have to ask this question in your practice. What else should I be doing? And we open to being guided and led. And that's something, again, I do all the time as well. What else? Right? And I'm constantly being led. Right? New Saints, I think, is a testament to what it looks like to constantly say yes to the change, right? There's such a shift between Love and Rage and New Saints that people are really tuning into. These are two different books, because I was two different people writing it, right? Like, there was an evolution, right? Even though there's such a connection between both books, right? One book was starting as the other was being published, right? So, but New Saints is the testament to how I change and continue to change. And so the next book will be completely different, right? Because I'll be a different person, right? So I would tell young people and students, right? It's like, prepare to continue changing for the rest of your life. If you're really committed to real collective liberation and social change, then you have to be constantly shifting, changing, evolving. Where you start and the work may be very different down the line, right? And that's okay.
I really appreciate the bringing it back to the grief work, the disappointment of, I'm one person. This is a capacity I have. This is the change I can enact. And letting ourselves, really honestly, be with that. I just really appreciate how it keeps coming back to, the grief work. How would someone, and I know I asked this a little bit in a different way, but what is a way someone can work with their grief? How can someone tend to their heart? And I'm also really appreciating the question that you had asked around like sitting down and practice and prayer and asking, what else can I do? I think that's so important to sit down in that way. And I will go back to now my question of, how does someone tend to their heart? How does someone work with their grief?
There has to be first a really gentle approach to the grief itself, right? Even a kind of tenderness, right? When we're trying to understand that the grief is here to teach us, to show us something important, right, about who we are. So the grief is a teacher, is a friend, right? So that mentality is really important to start with, right? And I encourage people to make space for grief every day, even if you don't feel as if you're grieving. Like still open up space in a formal way to connect to the grief, right? And grief for me is often felt as a deep disappointment. There's a disappointment, right? How can I choose to feel that, right? And to offer it space, right? And then there is, the natural world, right? The elements, the land, the trees, and the waters, right? I take my grief work to the natural world, right? To the earth, to the waters, right? I tell people to go and sit with water, right? And let the water hold our grief. Let the earth support us. Feel the winds, right? And the air, like feel our breath moving energy in and out. Creating relationships with people who are themselves openly grieving is really important. It's hard to do this work if we feel like we're the only person in our community or friend group and so forth who's doing this. Find some support from other folks around you, because that support really helps us to cut through these feelings of isolation. Right. And that's not the case. Everyone is grieving, regardless of if they recognize that or not. They're still grieving. I can feel grief in everyone around me. Right. And I feel a closeness because of that to folks. Right. Again, going back to what we were discussing earlier about letting the heart break and having the courage to feel the heartbreak. Right. What does your grief actually feel like? Physically, emotionally, mentally, right? Like get curious about the experience of grief, right? And let that grief again connect you to people, right? Intimately, right? A closeness, like let your grief allow you to draw close to people, right? That kind of drawing close really helps us to work with the feeling of distance. We can feel like the world is full of strangers if we don't have this kind of empathy, right? I don't feel like the world is full of strangers. I feel like the world is full of humans trying to figure out how to be happy and how to get free, right? I want to connect to that. Right. And that helps me to see even strangers as, well, potential friends, our colleagues, right? On this path of getting free.
Yeah, I'm taking a moment to just pause and be with the wisdom that you're sharing. I think about these emotions of grief, of disappointment, of loneliness. I find what has been most helpful for me is when they arise to, let myself feel them. And then also to feel that others feel the same, and let that be something that connects us instead of separates. And I'm really hearing that in what you're saying, especially like looking out, and it's like not seeing strangers, but just seeing humans trying their best. To make it in this world. And what a beautiful approach that definitely, or you're like, understanding of grief as this deep disappointment. And my goodness, I feel like there is so much to be disappointed about as we look around.
Absolutely. Right. And another thing that comes to mind too is that, and this is what I really appreciate Buddhism for, which is helping people understand that, suffering happens, right? It's not extraordinary. It's like, this is what happens. This is what we're trying to get free from, right? And so knowing that, and particularly the teachings around the nature of the reality that we share. Like there's going to always be struggle. There's always going to be harm, right? There's always going to be some type of conflict, right? Or just a restriction of resources for people, right? In some way, that's always going to happen, right? And so we can just acknowledge that and say, yeah, and this is why we're trying to get free, both like politically and socially, but also ultimately spiritually. And so there has to be some willingness to witness and to be with suffering as well, which is key to the practice of Buddhism.
Thank you for bringing that in. I was leading a meditation on Monday around equanimity, and one of the students was talking about, I feel like equanimity can be spiritual bypassing.
Yeah.
And she talked about teachers she's worked with who have said, in the face of everything going on, just love and light. And I was like, so many of these teachings have come as a result of suffering. They speak to suffering. They're results of, they're asking us. And so it just makes me think about sometimes the hypocrisies, like people might feel we're hearing these spiritual teachings and people might distort it for their own path, and how that feels like, oh, but it's about the suffering and how do we get free?
Yeah. There's no going around it or bypassing it, right? It's about going through it and finding joy even through the struggle of suffering, right? Joy can hold the suffering, right? Because joy is this expression of spaciousness, right? Space is always present, though we forget about it. Like we can feel disconnected. But once we remember and open back to space, we realize that there's enough space to hold everything, right? And I don't have to be so active in that holding. I think we get into trouble when we're like, oh, I have to do this. No, actually, the teachings actually say you have to relax into this, right? You're not bypassing, you're not pushing away, you're allowing wherever arises to arise. Only when you're able to do that can you respond, right? If there are things that need to be changed after accepting it, then you change it, right? But I think so many folks, particularly spiritual teachers and guides, like they haven't done the deeper work of accepting the truth of things, right? Because it will cut through, this kind of acceptance will cut through all of our narratives, all of our like fantasies, all of our everything, all of our notions, right? It will get us to the truth, right? And when we get to the truth, we'll change. We will become different people. And some of us are terrified of making that choice because we're so comfortable where we are, right? But where we are isn't necessarily our homes, nor is where we're at necessarily conducive to real experiences of liberation.
Yeah, I think about in New Saints when you talk about it's as if we have been in this like dark closet and then someone like opens the door and it's like this light and this freedom. You're like, oh, but I've gotten so used to like, even though it's uncomfortable, but it's like, I've gotten used to it. And for some, it's like, how do we choose to be free? And then I guess what I'm hearing is like, some don't want to be free. Exactly. They're happy just as they are.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can acknowledge that, right? Mm-hmm. And we have to be careful about forcing people to get free who aren't ready. Mm-hmm. Because we all have to make our own choices to get free. Right. As I often talk about, it's like I have to rely on the choices that I'm making, because when it's really hard, I don't want to blame anyone for anything. I don't want to say, oh, everyone else was doing it and I did it and like, this sucks. No, when it's hard, I remind myself I chose this. And then I reflect on why I chose it. I chose it because this was how I was going to get free. This is how I was going to suffer less by moving into this and telling the truth about it, experiencing the intensity of this, but also getting to the spaciousness that's holding everything, which begins to alleviate the intensity of suffering, right? There's so much space in my practice now that my suffering is so different than it was when I began my practice, right? But you have to trust the space. Space as this experience, space as an element, but this reality that everything is already being held. I just have to trust that it's being held.
There is such a difference, I think, even somatically, like when things feel constricted versus when they feel spacious. Yeah. And letting ourselves like have an embodied sense of these ideas too, is really important. Yeah.
Well, and what goes along with all of this too is our contemplation of death and dying and impermanence in general, right? There's so much resistance because we really haven't tended to the fact that we will die. Right. This is another thing that I'm deeply appreciative to this path for, which is like taking me to death, right? And saying, okay, what is death? Right? How do we practice with this? Right? And how do you tend to death? By choosing to live now. Right? Over and over again, these questions, these inquiries, right, are really rooted in a resistance to death. Right. We have to process that. So we have to come back into relationship with death. Right. We love birth so much. Like we celebrate birth and everything is wonderful, but we forget that the conclusion to birth is death. Right. As the Buddha taught, everything that is born must die. Right. So I will die. And I've gotten to a point in my practice where I'm okay with that. Right. And so because I'm okay with that, all this pressure kind of has kind of dissipated. Right. So I'm not resisting my death, but I have all this energy now to invest in the moment. Right. So I can work. Right. I can do what I'm called to do. And I can say, and I'll do this till I die. And that will be the end of this part of the work. There's such an attachment to life. There's such an attachment to our bodies, right? And we say, oh, I am my body, which is not the case. Our bodies are an experience, like everything, right? But if we don't see everything, including our bodies, or even living as an experience, then everything gets so dense and material, right? And that materialism, that density, when it becomes too much, turns into hopelessness, turns into a real kind of like materialism, but also kind of a nihilism as well, where we get to a point where we're like, oh, nothing matters. Right? What's the point? That comes when everything gets so heavy.
Mm.
And this is why we have to do the work that we've been talking about. We have to feel everything. We have to open to joy, open to space. We have to remember all those who came before us who faced really difficult situations, right? And relying on the support of communities and elders and teachers and guides and so forth, right? We're relying on our love as well, but also remembering that this is just one experience that we're having in this moment. As I often say, it's just a moment. Life is just a moment. But we have to be present to this moment and to prepare for the next moment, which is death. Right? Which is even saying that, it's not as heavy for me as it may sound. Like death for me is not a thing. It's not a noun. It is a verb, or a verb in terms of like, it is about moving, transition, right? Not this destination, but just another experience that we move through to get to another experience.
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing in death and dying as something that we know is going to happen. But I do find living in the West or living in the US, it's something that we don't talk about.
Right.
And I'm thankful to my teachers, and I think about Dr. Miles Neal, who I study with, and in a course called Liberation on Our Hands, we will practice dying. Yes. We'll practice dying. We'll practice thinking about those that we love dying. And then it's like dying as this preparation of another lifetime and then another lifetime. And what that reminds me is like, how do we keep like a long view? So it's not only like, what am I doing in this lifetime for this lifetime, but in preparation for the next lifetime. And I appreciate how you're also talking about like our ancestors and our descendants. Like there's some level of like responsibility and connection there that feels reverent, that like feels sacred, instead of the nihilism of like, oh, nothing matters. It's all pointless. And it's like, well, like you're saying, like, no, this moment is precious.
Yeah. Yeah. We continue. Like think of existence as a continuum. That consciousness is moving in and out of different shapes and forms, right? So we're in a form now. Death is the introduction to another form, right? Beyond this. And that's been so important for me, that I am more than this life and this body, that I was before, I am now, and I will continue to be. And everything is really based on how I show up and be present to this moment, to each moment that I get. What kind of love, what kind of care, what kind of awareness do I offer to this moment? That shapes what will happen. And because I've done this in the past, it has shaped how I'm able to do it right now in the moment. Right. As I tell people, people are like, oh, who was I? What's going to happen past and future lives? Well, I tell people to look at right now. What are you doing right now? That will let you know where you've come from, and it will let you know where you're headed. Just by the quality of awareness and experiencing and love and care that you're embodying, it will tell you so much about who you are.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that in, that connection of, and I know I love, you talked about in the New Saints, how like thinking about karma, and it's like, what a mystery, like trying to really understand it, like fully. And I definitely feel that. But I feel like what you're describing right now is a little bit of karma. Like, what is your love and your life and your actions like right now? And there's a connection there with the past lives and the lives to come. That feels very grounded.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's it.
A question that I had, and I was like, I know this is such a big question, but I want to ask it. How does one know when they're free? How does one know that I am free? I'm on the journey and like, how does someone know that?
Yeah. Well, there are so many different ways to know that. But it really depends on what kind of freedom we're talking about, because when we say freedom, it's a huge concept. There are different levels of freedom, right? But in general, I often start with this, like, what is my experience of suffering right now? And for me, that's an important question because I experience like far less suffering than I did before I started practicing in my 20s. Right? It's night and day, actually. Like I could never have imagined this level of, I would, use the word equanimity. And when I say equanimity, I'm also really talking about balance, like this level of balance that I can experience in this life, right? That is a level of freedom, right? But ultimate freedom is the extinguishing of suffering. And when suffering is extinguished, then what is left is the bliss, right? And you will know bliss, right? Bliss will eradicate the sense of self, right? So as long as we're referring to I and me, we're not ultimately free, right? So as we move through these levels of freedom, the less we suffer, the more we're getting free, right? And that there's a kind of accountability practice because, we can bypass, right? And say, oh, okay, I'm happy, I'm free. But I'm talking about as you are authentically, deeply engaged with collective struggle, right? And you can feel that struggle and you're engaged in that struggle, but that struggle isn't engaging you. It's not consuming you. That's a level of freedom, right? The more that we can hold chaos and awareness and non-reactivity is really us consuming the chaos. But when we find ourselves overreacting and overwhelmed and just consumed by chaos and feeling hopeless and full of despair, the chaos is consuming us. So I want to get to, which I am, in this place of like really consuming the suffering, the chaos, the impermanence, which means that I choose to feel everything, right? And to process everything. My grief is constant with me, but it's not overwhelming me. I feel grief all the time, but it's not the dominant experience because there's so much space, right? I'm being held by space as I'm feeling the grief and the joy, as well as the outrage, right? And the disillusionments and the hopelessness. Yeah, that's all there, but it's not overwhelming.
Yeah, thank you so much for speaking to it in that way. Because I was really like hearing letting ourselves really authentically engage with the collective struggle. Yeah. And like, as we authentically engage with it, it's like, we're going to feel it. We're going to maybe feel the despair and the grief and the disappointment. But instead of that, like bringing us down into collapse, instead of that consuming us, it's like there's enough space where that can exist and like action can exist and hopefulness can exist. Instead of it's like, that's the only reality. A question that came up for me is, what would be the difference between like chaos consuming us and then letting our heart break? Is there a difference?
Allowing our hearts to break in a practice sense is actually just being aware of how we just allow the disappointment to be present. Right? It's not a reaction, it's a response. It's a choice. Being consumed by the brokenheartedness is reactivity. Right? It's is a reaction to something that's already happening. We feel overwhelmed. It's too much. And we start reacting. That reactivity actually builds layers of resistance, right? And therefore, deeper levels of suffering and discomfort, right? But when I choose to let my heart break, I am choosing this in awareness. I'm choosing it in love, actually, for myself and for the collective. I am doing this in order to metabolize what is mine to metabolize, instead of not doing this labor and work, which means I become work for other people. That means other people who are trying to do their work of metabolizing has to hold space for me, because I'm not doing this for myself. Right. And we all are aware of that. We have a lot of experience with trying to support people who aren't doing their work. So we have to do a lot of emotional labor for folks, right? Instead of them choosing to start this labor for themselves, and then we can get together and support one another, which is what collective healing is. We're supporting one another in the work, right? But not just like showing up and just doing everyone's work for them. That's not going to get anyone free, actually. And then you'll become really resentful over time. Right?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really hearing the difference between the reactivity and the responsiveness. And I feel like what I'm also hearing is like taking intentional time every day to sit and be with whatever it is, instead of it's like it's happening and the mind is just going and we're thinking, but it's like we're not taking that intentional time to just like sit and practice or be with whatever it might be that like we can allows us to be with it, but how important that is.
Exactly.
The process.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's choosing the discomfort instead of the discomfort choosing us. Right. And people, you know, I think people struggle with that teaching, you know, and, you know, I think people say, oh, I don't want to suffer more. Like, why am I choosing this? And I say, we're suffering anyway. And there's a layer of resistance that is really adding to our discomfort. So let's cut through the resistance and say, welcome. Like, I'm already struggling. Let's just say yes to the struggle. That's the consuming, right? And let that struggle be present. And let's start getting curious about what it feels like, right? Because the struggle or the suffering is actually showing us all the ways in which we're perpetuating the suffering. So you start actually making choices to suffer less. You know, again, we're doing too much work for people, right? Okay, let's address that. Like, oh, I don't have strong enough boundaries. Okay, let's address that. I'm not spending enough time in the natural world, on land, with the waters, with the trees. Okay, let's go out and take a hike. You know, let's be with the elements which can hold and support me. Like, the suffering will show you how to decrease it, but we have to get close enough to allow suffering to show us, not keep this distance, this resistance, right? And it's scary, absolutely, but this is the only freedom, only way to get free. This is the only way I know how to get free, and it's working for me, so I stick with it.
Right. Yes. Thank you. I have two more questions. As you were talking, I find an experience I will have, and sometimes my students will share, is looking out and feeling guilty that there's so much suffering out there. And I am, in comparison and relatively materially, at least, well.
Yeah, which is wonderful. Right. Guess what? You think you have a kind of like privilege. Great. Then use that privilege to help others. That's the point. You know, I tell people all the time, it's like, we want to practice solidarity with communities and people who, you know, are struggling. Absolutely. But if I am someone who's struggling, I don't need you to show up with your suffering and add it to mine. I need you to show up resourced to support me in my struggle. right? And so that's part of my ethic. It's like, I want to show up in the world as resourced as possible. This is why I practice and train in the way that I do. So I can show up with resources, right? I can show up with spaciousness. I can show up with deep understanding. I can show up with compassion. I can show up with love, right? I can show up with whatever material resources that I have, right? Whatever materially I have to share, I can show up with it, right? And so if we are someone who, we may not, be struggling a lot. We may have access to a lot of resources. Absolutely. That's wonderful. Great. Bring those resources to communities of struggle, right? And redistribute those resources. If you have money, redistribute your money, right? But it's also about sharing skills, right? If you're a healer, show up and heal people. Like if you're a great cook for people, offer food. If you're a great organizer, show up and organize, right? If you're a great meditation teacher, show up and offer space for people to connect to themselves so they can continue the work of getting free, right? I think the guilt gets in the way of so many people's like liberation work. They just feel so guilty that I have so much. Right. Well, if that's a struggle, give it away. Right. Like if you're really comfortable, then get involved in real struggle with folks. Right.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really felt that quality of like, take ownership. Yeah. Take ownership for what you have and like share. And that feels so much more free than that guilt of like, oh, but I have so much and they don't. And it's like, okay, well, let me own that I have all this. And then what can I do to help with that?
Exactly.
Thank you. Yeah. I feel that question of like, how do we feel free? I feel a little more free right now after hearing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And another part of this too is that like we have to understand that part of our work is witnessing, watching and remembering what's happening. And there may be a lot of issues that we will never be able to impact, to get involved with, but we see what's happening to folks, right? And we can't look away, but we remember, right? Like we process what we're feeling. And then we use that practice to create a world, to work for a world where this stuff doesn't have to continue happening. So as we move through this period of systemic collapse, which I call the apocalypse and the new saints, as we move through this period, right, we have to remember what this was like and then commit to creating and building a world where this doesn't have to happen again.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm really hearing the dreaming of a new world as there is this systemic collapse instead of the resistance to, oh, this is happening. And it's like, well, it is happening. And then now what do we dream moving forward? The final question I wanted to ask is if there's any person or being or struggle or place that you'd want to dedicate to right now that maybe feels like would feel supportive to name or bring them into our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, so many. I think, of course, I think beyond just the physical world, and I think about the spirit world as well. So across the board, beings are struggling. But I would say here, right, in this world, I just want to dedicate everything to the abolition of all systems of harm and violence, to the abolition of fascism, right, to the abolition of systemic racism, to the abolition of transphobia and ableism, right, to anything that keeps anyone restricted from the resources that they need, that keeps people unsafe, that keeps people hungry, that keeps people dying in wars and genocides, may all of this be abolished, right? Mm. And, to the trans community here, right, offering this merit to abolish all these systems that unfairly target and surveil, the trans community, to the Palestinians, right, to the Sudanese, like to the Congolese, to much more hidden communities in struggle, like the Haitian community, who we don't hear a lot about, but who are still really struggling collectively, to the Jamaicans, like still struggling to recover from the recent hurricane. All of it, to any system that prevents us from being free, may it be abolished.
May it be abolished. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, dear teacher, for taking this time, for your wisdom, just really like embodied, lived wisdom. I am personally I feel that joy. And I also feel that responsibility to keep doing the work that is mine. So thank you so much for being here. I'm just very deeply grateful.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye, y'all. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with your community so we can get this conversation out to more people. You can connect with me on my Instagram at Harpinder Man Yoga. You can also dive deeper with my book, Liberating Yoga. Until next time, keep practicing with intention and integrity. This is Liberating Yoga, where we honor yoga's past and shape its future. Until next time.